Hi, everybody. Turn your cell phones off, please. Thank you so much for coming to tonight's program featuring Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro. You're supposed to say yay. And journalist Emily Jane Fox. I'm Andrea Grossman, the founder of Writer's Block, now in our 30th season. Thank you. I want to thank the governor's team for including us in his hectic schedule. They've been really amazing, and I appreciate it. And I also want to thank WME for their immediate and incredibly gracious, generous support in making this event possible for us here at this beautiful, beautiful theater. And it was sort of at a moment's notice when we had to change venues, and I'm really, I'm happy to see all of you here tonight. Before we get to tonight's program, I need to go over a few important details. Many of you have heard my security lecture before, my stern lecture. But looking out at all of you tonight, I'm confident that you're a well-behaved and lovely crowd. I mean, all of you go to Temple Emmanuel here, and I know that you're going to be good. But please listen carefully. Writer's Block loves free speech. And Governor Shapiro, who is an absolutely terrific Attorney General for the state of Pennsylvania, he knows his Constitution, and I bet he appreciates the First Amendment. But tonight we don't. The only ones who are accorded free speech are Governor Shapiro, Emily, and myself. We have loads of security here tonight, as you can see. Even Sniffy the dog is here. So I'm telling you now, anyone who interrupts or disrupts our program tonight will be removed, dispatched forthwith. I really have loved saying that all around the house today, dispatched forthwith. Disruption and interruption will simply not be tolerated, so I very much appreciate your cooperation here. Now for tonight. Josh Shapiro captured my attention years ago when, as Attorney General of Pennsylvania, he inherited an investigation into clergy abuse. His relentless pursuit of justice resulted in a roaring message to other state attorneys general that sexual abuse would simply not be tolerated, and he would make abusers face a very heavy price. He writes about this chapter of his career in his new book, Where We Keep the Light, and it's so powerful. In Where We Keep the Light, Governor Shapiro reveals a lot of interesting material, giving us personal and political perspectives of what informs his heaviest decisions. He's just launched his campaign for re-election as governor, and 4 years ago, he pretty much swept the state and managed to reel in voters from across the spectrum. Folks, the most consequential election of our time is coming up soon. A few Democratic leaders have risen to the top. I don't know yet whether Governor Shapiro will run because he didn't tell me that 2 minutes ago, so I'll pass it on, when he makes a decision. I'm so proud to offer all of you and him the opportunity to come to LA and see, so we can see what drives him and what he stands for. Emily Jane Fox is a journalist who has written for Vanity Fair, and she's appeared on NBC, MSNBC, and CNN, among others. She's notably the author of a book profiling the Trump children and their father's emotional grip he has on them. She has also been helpful to the governor in writing the book that you all see, Where We Keep the Light. So, anyway, you all want to take picture, and it's a great book. My speech just got screwed up, and I'm very sorry my iPad messed up. So when I bring Josh Shapiro and Emily on the stage, you will have an opportunity to take pictures for 20 seconds. Then you can put your phones away, and no filming and no texting. I greatly appreciate this. And remember, 20 seconds. Governor Josh Shapiro and Emily Fox.
Thank
Thank you.
Let's talk about the book.
Let's do it. I feel like this is a long time coming. You and I have spent many hours, days talking about everything in this book, and so it feels a little different to have an audience as we do it. Usually it's in the comfort of our speaker phones or in your house. This feels a little bit different, but I'm so happy to get to talk to you in front of all these wonderful people here. And in LA, welcome.
It's good to be here.
So happy to have you. Yeah. You brought a heat wave.
Brought a heat wave, and I got to see my sister Rebecca, who lives out here. So
cool. A real beating heart of the book, a true honored guest here. I don't know if you remember this, but the first time we talked about a book was in the midst of the craziness of the Vice President Harris vetting process that we will get to.
Yeah.
And you and I have known each other personally for 20 years, which is impossible because I'm only 16. And professionally for about a decade. And I didn't want to ask you what was going on because I'm a journalist and because I'm a friend, and you had enough people asking you what was going on. But I texted you and I said, at the end of every day, you need to go home and record a voice memo or write in a journal, because one day you are going to want to write a book and you're going to remember every detail of this. So that was the only thing I said to you during that process. And I'm really glad that you listened to my advice, because so much of that ended up in the book.
Yeah, and look, you gave me that great advice, and you said you're going to one day write a book, and I thought, look, I'm happy to take some notes here, but I'm never going to write a book. I really thought that books are for kind of what you do when you've completed your career, and God willing, I got a lot more runway. I got a lot more to go in my work, but even though that was sort of an acute moment in my career, even though that was sort of this moment that I think defined or introduced me to a lot of people for the first time, really throughout my life, I've been thinking about these ideas of service, of faith, of family, of sort of being able to just talk about the people that I meet along the way who I think enrich my life and enrich our country. And I remember we had the opportunity to sit down, and you convinced me, I think you should think about this. You should really consider writing a book. And so we set out to do that together. And I must say, I was really reluctant at first. And when Emily would talk to me and ask me questions about my family and deeply personal questions about my faith, I think I frustrated her for the first few weeks because I didn't share a whole lot. Because to be honest with you, I've always felt like in my business, you're there to serve other people, and you're not really supposed to be the story. Their hopes, their dreams, their struggles, their challenges, the things you do for them, that's what you're supposed to be focused on. And when I allowed myself to sort of be more open, when I allowed myself to share, when I answered your deep and probing questions, you helped me begin to see a number of through lines throughout my life that I really felt even more that I wanted to share.
Well, we're gonna talk about those through lines, but what I thought was interesting as we embarked on this, you are such a listener, and I think that that's what makes you an excellent governor now, and what has made you an excellent public servant your entire life. But I think having the opportunity to talk about you was very, very challenging. And if your path was service, my path was nosiness. So it was very fun for me to get to ask you questions. But when we first embarked on this and you decided, okay, I'm going to do this, the thing you kept saying over and over to me was, but I don't want this to be about me. And I kept saying to you, buddy, you're writing a memoir. It's going to be about you.
Yeah.
But I think that the way that we kind of got through it, or maybe the thing that really unlocked you was, yes, these are your stories and these are your experiences, but they're about your vision for America and what you want to see in this country, and frankly, what you do see in this country, because I think you have this incredible ability to show up and to listen in a way that I don't think politicians do anymore, and this is why I really wanted to spend so much time with you, because I've spent all the time with all the shitheads in politics. Like, I've interviewed them all, and you're the only one I'd want to spend more than an hour with. And
because I'm not a shithead, is that what you're saying?
Pretty much. Most of the time, you're kind of not. And And it
Hold on,
was
did
like
you hear that?
remarkable.
Most of the time, I'm kind of not. I appreciate the ringing
I don't want you to
endorsement,
get too big of
Emily.
a head.
Yeah.
But I think like you have a supreme ability to listen and to show up. And I think that gives you an incredible perspective of what the actual American experience and the vision for America can be in a way that mainstream media misses, that people on social media miss. And it can feel very heavy and very doom and gloomy. But because you are in these places every day and talking to real people, you have a very different vision of what it's actually like in this country. And the fact that you got to tell those stories was really remarkable.
And I was excited to tell the stories of those people. I mean, look, I think our politics and I think much of our media misses the goodness, misses the light that I see every day in communities. Whether it was, and I write about it in the book, the first time I was running for state representative and knocked on 18,000 doors and would show up at someone's home and just say, hey, what's on your mind? What can I do to help? And people would just open up. I'd show up in communities later on in my career and meet people who just needed a hand. And there's goodness in terms of what they were doing in their communities and goodness that came out of that exchange. Part of what I set out to do when we started writing this book is to show how the light that they're bringing into communities every day, frankly, is not reflecting in many of the politicians across this country today, and certainly not in our politics. And what I mean by that is the people are far better than the people who are leading them right now. And I wanted to be able to shine a light on that.
Can I ask you why? Why are we electing people that are not as good as the people that they're serving?
I think in many ways the incentive structure is all screwed up. You get more likes on Twitter or social media if you're more extreme, if you're more cruel, than you do if you're actually out trying to solve a problem, if you're highlighting something good that's happening. You raise more money the more extreme you are, as opposed to finding ways to come together and bring Democrats, Republicans, others together to actually solve a problem. Our incentive structures in our politics are all screwed up. And a lot of good people, unfortunately, are choosing not to go into a life of service. And so I set out to try and write this book about that goodness, that light that I see as a way of maybe in some ways curing our politics and being able to, talk more about how my family, how my faith called me into this service and has allowed me to connect with people in a deeper way. And then, of course, about 5 months through writing this book, the book and certainly the first chapter changed in many ways because that light went away a few hours after we completed our Passover Seder when darkness descended upon the governor's residence when we were attacked and firebombed and someone tried to kill me and my family, including my sister and her son who was there. And I will tell you that from that dark moment, the next day, we again began to see the light. People coming together, praying for us, finding ways to help heal us, pointing out the good things, not just the bad. And so in many ways, it reaffirmed the central reason why we wrote the book in the first place. My hope is that our politics can be cured, not by some outside force coming in and giving us some new prescription, but actually the people, the representatives, listening to the people that they represent and actually bring our politics up to the level of the communities that they're sworn to serve and protect.
It's so, I'm glad you brought up the events that happened almost a year ago. We're nearing Passover, we're nearing April, and we were like 2 months away from the deadline of the book. The book had been largely written, and this seismic event in your life that really reframed how you thought about your service and your place in this country, it happened, and that's an interesting thing to kind of have to reframe a book. But really, from kind of our first conversation 9-10 months earlier, we kind of landed on this book being about your faith, which maybe it was divine, or maybe this was just so central to who you are. But it's an interesting time as a Jewish person in public life to choose to write about your faith, and as central as it is to you and to your family. I really have read nothing about the book except for 2 articles that my dad has insisted that I read. And one of them was basically saying, like, how bold of Governor Shapiro to focus on his Jewishness in 2026, which we could talk about at length. I find that so offensive. But it was a choice to lean into your Jewishness at this point in time. And I'm wondering why that you were compelled to do that and why that felt so central to you as a representative.
I think if I'm going to write a book about what has called me to serve and the way in which I serve each day, I had to focus on the 2 things that drive me to serve. My family, both the way I was raised, the way my sister and I were raised, and the way Lori and I are trying to raise our 4 kids, and my faith, which has called me to service. We talk in this book about some of my religious practices, right? Going to synagogue or having a kosher home. But in reality, for me, it's less about religion. It's less about a ritualistic practice and more about that sort of through line in faith that actually doesn't just connect me with other American Jews or other Jews, but people of all different faiths. I'll share a story with you, which I read about in the book. When I was getting ready to run for governor, I wanted to start with an ad that reintroduced me, I was the Attorney General at the time, reintroduced me to the people of Pennsylvania in a deeply personal way, just telling them who I am, what I'm all about. And we decided to film that ad sitting around the table doing something my family and I do every single week, and that is having our Sabbath dinner together, our Friday night dinner together. And we had some of the political consultants say to me, hey, I don't know that you want to do that. People are going to know you're Jewish. I'm like, I think they know I'm Jewish. Much like you said, some of the reaction in this book. But what we found in explaining, hey, every Friday night I'm home with my family. My faith calls me to serve. My family taught me the importance of service. What we found is that when I went back out in the community, including some parts of rural Pennsylvania where I'd show up and increase the Jewish population by probably 100% when I got there. People were so excited to come over to me and say, hey, I want to tell you what lunch is like after church on Sunday. I'd be in part of North Philly and they'd say, I want to tell you about my iftar after fasting all day for Ramadan. Hey, let me tell you about my Christmas Eve dinner. People want to talk to me about their family traditions, their faith traditions. And so what I learned, in part by writing this book and in part through my service, is that, yes, that religious practice is important to me, but even more important is the faith, the universality of faith, the thing that brings us together in common purpose with common bonds, no matter how we worship or if we worship at all. I think that speaks to the goodness, certainly of Pennsylvania, I would argue America, and I think it speaks to something that we need to get back to in this country, a depth of connection to one another, a depth of connecting to something, frankly, stronger than what pulls us every day in our chaotic and cruel politics today. And so that, I think, is an important theme throughout the book, that universality of faith that connects us all regardless of how we might worship or where we might worship.
I've been to a Baptist church with you on a Sunday morning, and I can attest that there is a real connection and through line, just people who believe and people who have strong core central values. There's a real understanding there. You mentioned how service and faith was a big part of your house growing up, and it was one of the things I loved hearing about the most. Your mom and dad were both incredibly devoted people of service in their own ways, and you at your bar mitzvah is one of my favorite stories. So please tell me a little bit about your dad, who was a doctor, and your mom, who just devoted herself to a lot of service of those around her, and then young Josh Shapiro growing up.
Yeah, so my sister Rebecca, my brother Adam, and I, we grew up in a house where our parents were always doing for others. And so that was the image that we had growing up of seeing parents that would serve and help others. My dad was the local pediatrician, so any kid that was vomiting would call my dad, right? Or the parents would call, not the kid. Or any kid that needed something, the parents would reach out to my dad. And my dad had this beautiful way of empowering parents to make their kid feel better, right? these moms would call frenetic and he'd say, "What do you think, Mom?" And really that was very empowering for that mom to be able to figure out how she was going to help make the kid better, how the dad was going to make the kid better. And that really stuck with me as a kid, seeing my dad as like the fixer, like the guy that could make something better. At the same time, my mom, who had been a public school teacher in Philadelphia, decided to stay home and raise me and my siblings. She was like this incredible activist. She was always involved in the community, doing stuff. And at a time when I was a young boy, I think 6, 7, 8 years old, she taught me about this place called the Soviet Union, where there were Jewish kids called refuseniks who weren't allowed to be free. They weren't allowed to be in the Little League like me, or eat pizza when they wanted like me, or travel like me, or be able to go to a school like me. I mean, this place was foreign. I couldn't even imagine that. I couldn't imagine someone not having freedom that was just like inherent in everything I did as a kid. My mom led the Soviet Jewry movement in Philadelphia. She came to my class and taught my friends about it, and she inspired me to start this pen pal program. Back then we didn't have email. We would write letters to this kid named Avi Goldstein in the Soviet Union in Tbilisi, which was where he lived, writing him letters to try and offer him some hope, writing him letters to try to, give him some comfort, some friendship. We got other kids to do the same. And then my mom took me to Washington, D.C., and she said, "We've got to go talk to these powerful people down there, these senators, and see if we can get his name," the boy who was a refusenik, Avi Goldstein, "out of the Soviet Union." Now, we went down to D.C., and I gotta be honest with you, it's not like that was the moment, my aha moment, as I write about, where all of a sudden I thought I was going to go into politics. All I knew is these guys had fancy suits, and they were very powerful, and I was there to talk about my friend Avi that I would write letters to and see if we could get him out, because I wanted to meet him. That's how I was thinking as a 12-year-old boy at the time.
A young Senator Joe Biden was there, right?
And a young Senator Joe Biden met with me, and Senator Arlen Specter met with me. And they took me to Senator Kennedy's office, where we told him about Avi Goldstein. And I just asked, "Can you help bring my friend to America?" And 3 days before my bar mitzvah outside Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, he was released from the Soviet Union, and we stood together and had a bar mitzvah at our synagogue together at that moment. And I got to tell you, I get chills thinking about it. I didn't learn at that moment I wanted to go into politics. I still didn't totally understand what a senator did. But I knew that if I focused, someone just said I still don't. I knew that if I focused on something, if I believed in something, that I could find some power within me to do something about it. And my mom taught me that. And I am to this day so profoundly grateful to her for that. And I would not be here, not just literally, but figuratively, but for my mom and what she taught me and how she showed me a need to go out and serve others.
Moms are the best.
Yeah, moms are.
Nothing better. You brought up knocking on doors and your dad's service and his place in the community. And when you first decided to run for office, when you did say, "Hey, politics are maybe my calling," you knock on thousands of doors, and how many of them would say, "Hey, aren't you the pediatrician's son?"
Yeah, literally. So, well, first, I decided I'm going to run for state representative. The district is 60% Republican. I'm a Democrat. Nobody gave me a shot to win. I think they were like happy I was running because then someone would, right, just to fill the spot. And I did what I thought candidates were supposed to do. I put on like my one ill-fitting suit at the time. I think I was like 28. And I would go to events, and no one would ever recognize me. No one would ever let me speak. No one would ever let me do anything because the whole community was run by the Republican Party. And so I came home one night just so pissed off. I said to Lori, "They're not letting me speak. They're not letting me do anything. What am I supposed to do?" She goes, "You got to go figure something else out," which my wife is very good at telling me to go figure something else out. There is a great theme in this book about how Lori has helped me figure things out by giving me a lot of tough love. The next day, I put on a comfortable pair of shoes with that ill-fitting suit. I still wear comfortable shoes. And I went out and knocked on 18,000 doors in my community. And for probably the first 100 I would like knock, and then I would basically read my entire website to them of all my policy positions.
So compelling.
And you could tell they were like, "We need this young man to get away from our door." And no one would really say anything, and they'd gladly take my literature just so I would leave. And then I got to, I don't know, the 100th door or something, and I went through my litany of policy things I was going to do, and this person says, wait, aren't you Dr. Steve's son? And I said, I am. Oh, he's my kid's pediatrician. I'll vote for you. And then I thought, maybe I just need to lead with the Dr. Steve's son thing. But after that, the person then started to tell me all the things that mattered to her. And that's when I learned I got to knock on these doors and not talk, but listen. And I credit that experience with teaching me how to be a politician, elected leader that knows how to listen. And I think if you're really open to listening, if you're really open to hearing what's on someone's heart, what their real struggles are, what their challenges are, you can be a far better public servant. And there's story after story after story in this book about the people I listened to and then helped make change. I went up to a counter at Sheetz. Anybody from Western Pennsylvania know where Sheetz is? Few people know Sheetz. Think you get gas and amazing food in the same place. If you're from the Philly area, you go to Wawa. If you're from the Pittsburgh area, you go to Sheetz. And don't start me on trying to choose and all that because, it gets messy. But anyway, I go up to this counter at Sheetz, and this woman says to me, I was the Attorney General at the time, General, you have to fix this. I said, what do you need fixed? She said, my husband is getting cancer treatments at this one particular health center, and that health center is going to war with the other health center, and they're about to fight to the point where if you have a health insurance card from one, you won't be able to go to the other. And if my husband can't get those cancer treatments, he's going to die. And I got to tell you something. I listened to her, and it wasn't just lip service. I got back in my truck afterwards, and I vowed I am going to fight for this woman. I'm going to fight for the hundreds of thousands of Pennsylvanians who are about to lose their health care. And ultimately, as I write about in the book, we prevailed in that. It's an example of what I learned on those doors, how to listen, to be open to people when they're at their most vulnerable, hear what they have to say, and turn their words into action. Listen, see, do. That's what I've tried to do throughout my career, and I think I learned that knocking on those doors as Dr. Steve's son.
We spend a lot of time talking with that feedback loop, right? The listening, the seeing, the feeling, and then the action, which I think is very rare as someone who has the capacity to do and has the job to do, that you're also showing up and listening and having the empathy there. And I think one of the things that I saw weigh on you the most was when we talked about the Catholic Church. And I know Andrea brought it up, and I'm so glad that she did, because as someone who got to hear basically every story that you have to tell, that was the most impactful for me to tell. To listen to. And so I would love for you to just talk about how, as Attorney General, you got started on investigating the Catholic Church, and then how that listening and that feeling really impacted the way in which the case was able to actually prevail.
Yeah. I got elected Attorney General in 2016. And one of the first things that we did was get sworn into the grand jury and learn about the cases that were underway, by your predecessor. And there was a small case of some potential abuse of a handful of children, which is awful, by a priest. And we decided we were going to continue that investigation, put a lot of resources into it. And the more we dug, the more we investigated, the more search warrants we served, the more we began to unearth the horrors of what had been happening in Pennsylvania for decades. In the end, there were thousands of children who we found had been abused by hundreds of predator priests. That investigation took about 1.5 years. It was the hardest thing I've ever done in my professional life. Hard because just the grind of the work, the legal process, is incredibly difficult. Hard because the Catholic Church is arguably the most powerful organization on the face of the earth, and they threw money and lawyers and all kinds of pressure our way to stop us from doing this. Hard because the victims who had been let down by every institution in their lives, the Catholic Church, the local police department that refused to investigate, sometimes their parents who refused to believe them, their school who didn't look out for them. Here now I was the institution, and I was determined not to let them down, to see this through, to fight the battle in the court against the church and hold these predator priests accountable and give these victims something they had been denied for generations, and that is a modicum of justice. The other thing I was fighting was that I had to do this in complete secret. Because of the grand jury process, you're not allowed to talk to people about it. And so my best, people who are not sworn in the grand jury, my best friend in the entire world since the 9th grade, my wife, who I talked to, about everything with, I couldn't come home and talk to her about it. And it was so deeply challenging personally to be a father of 4 kids in the midst of spending your entire day learning about horrific abuse of children. You have to go to work and hear testimony of how priests would put crosses around the necks of the children who they were violating every day, passing these kids from predator priest to predator priest. The bishop who had a file of all of this written down, locked in his cabinet, sharing that information with the Vatican, but not sharing that information with local law enforcement. We'd be dealing with that all day and then come home and have your kids run over to you when you get through the door. And I must say, at times, I read about in the book, I felt all I want to do is hug them and not let them go. And then at other times, I felt super withdrawn from them and from Lori. We plowed through this. We got to the end of it. And we were able to provide some justice for these individuals. I am convinced to this day that part of the reason I went so hard after this is not just for the victims and not just for justice, but back to your question before, because of the way I was raised, because of some of the challenges I know my mom dealt with growing up, and because the way my father was such a defender of children throughout his life. And so it's another example of how being raised in that environment called me to serve and do this and drove me to try and bring justice for these victims. And I'm proud of the fact that we not only brought justice for these victims, we really set off a series of events in states all across the country, including here in California, where attorneys general took up these cases and ultimately held thousands of these priests accountable for their abuse of tens of thousands of children across the country.
It's incredible what you were able to accomplish when really no one else had really been able to accomplish that. And you talk about the isolation from Lori and from not being able to talk about this publicly, and the ramifications for you personally, which were great. But I also have to think about the victims, and I know you thought so much about the victims who had been let down by all these institutions. And I know a big thing that you struggled with was they also couldn't know that you were investigating this. And that was a huge issue, that they thought you were letting them down when you were actually grinding and grinding and grinding, because none of this could be done in public view. It was all behind the grand jury, and some of them would come in and testify, and then nothing would happen because it couldn't happen publicly. So talk to me a little bit about that and what you did, because I think the way that you handled the victims is so indicative for how you really listen and show how you care about all the people who you serve.
Yeah. So the way the grand jury process would work is we'd have a victim come in and they would testify as to what happened to them. And then they would leave. And they wouldn't know if any other victims came before them or came after them. They wouldn't know if this case was just about them or it was about something broader. And I think they would go home and they would just wonder, is anything going to come of this? Is this attorney general going to actually do anything that is going to bring about justice? Because remember, these are people who throughout their entire lives had been let down. As we were getting close to the end, and we were being fought by the Catholic Church to keep this from ever seeing the light of day, I began to hear about victims who thought that I was going to shelve this report and never let the truth come out. And it broke my heart that they would think that. But by the way, I understand why they would, because they didn't have a window into what we were seeing, what we were dealing with. And so I decided to take really the unorthodox approach of inviting a number of the victims to my office, where they came and met one another for the first time. And they came in, and while I couldn't tell them what was going on, I just kept reassuring them that I hear them, I'm fighting for them, and we're going to bring about justice. And they sat there one after the other, sharing their truth And many of them also sat there and said, I don't believe you're ever going to help have this see the light of day. Everyone has failed me in my life, and you're going to fail me too. It was the most emotionally gut-wrenching meeting I have ever had in my 2 decades of public service. Months later, when we prepared to release the report, we invited all of them to be there sitting with me when that report came out. They've become like family to me. These are people who every year on the date that that report came out in August, I call them, I check in on them, how you doing? Some of them are doing really well. Some of them are still struggling. But we have this bond that we've created, and I think it speaks to the way I try and do public service. Make it about the people, make it about the fight for them, and keep the focus on delivering justice and doing right by people.
One of my favorite stories in the book comes from this section, and obviously it has to do with Lori's wisdom, where she told you to just write a letter to the Pope.
She did.
And it actually ended up being one of the things that allowed the victims to know you were, in fact, investigating this and preparing a report. Can you just tell that story?
So as we got to the end of the investigation and prepared a report, the bishops were going to court to try and stop us from being able to release the report. Remember, they're bringing all these high-powered lawyers in, and they got all the resources in the world, and they're telling the judge not to let this out. And I couldn't sleep. I was so upset. And Lori, as she always does, goes, well, you got to figure something out. I'm like, I know I got to figure something out. Do you have any ideas? And she said, do you remember years ago when the Pope came to visit Philadelphia for the World Meeting of Families, and you greeted him? He actually technically stayed in the county where I was the county executive. You greeted him, you shook his hand, and then you followed him into the seminary where he was staying. And he went and he had a meeting with survivors of sexual abuse. And you came home and you told me about that meeting. I go, yeah, so? She goes, well, don't you remember you heard him say that he was apologizing and something like this should never happen? I go, yeah. She goes, well, I think you should write the Pope a letter and tell him what's going on here. I bet he wouldn't be happy with that. And I said, I had the same reaction. I laughed. And I said, babe, people don't just like write a letter to the Pope and do that. I couldn't sleep that night. She went to sleep just fine, by the way. I couldn't sleep. And I Googled for a few minutes about that meeting that the Pope had with those survivors. And lo and behold, his traveling secretary or whatever had a synopsis of that meeting, including the words of the Pope that said something like this should have never been allowed to happen, and it will never happen again. And I will always try and fight for justice for victims. So I decided to take his words and write a letter that night, throughout the night, to the Pope. Lori woke up in the morning. She couldn't believe I actually did that. I shared the letter with her. And then imagine going into your office full of prosecutors and saying, I think I have a way to break this whole case open. I'm going to send a letter to the Pope. But they stuck with me on it. We wrote this letter to the Pope, and then we had a huge challenge. How do you actually get a letter to the Pope, right? And we actually worked through the U.S. ambassador to the Vatican. We were able to get the letter over there. Had no idea if it was received or how it was received. And then some short time later, I got outreach from a professor at St. Joe's University in Philadelphia who happened to be, I didn't know this at the time, and he reached out and said, would you come see me? I don't know why this professor would want to see me. Went to his office at St. Joe's University. He told me he happened to be the boyhood friend of the Pope and that my message had been received. And a few days later, the bishops in Pennsylvania acknowledged that this report existed and said that the report should be released. The court ruled that it should be released, and it was. And so I don't know to this day what the Pope did. I don't even know if the Pope ever read the letter himself. But I do know that life works in mysterious ways. The fact that I was there that day back in, I think it was 2015, to greet him. The fact that he had that impromptu meeting with survivors. The fact that I thought enough about it to say something to Lori at the time, and years later, she remembered it and challenged me to think about how we might be able to go about getting this out for survivors. I don't know. The world works in mysterious ways, and this is an example of how we were able to fit together all those different pieces of my service to create an opportunity for real justice for these victims.
It's amazing to hear the story, and I've now heard it many times, and it really, like, the coincidence or the kismet of it all is amazing. And as you said, Lori is such a linchpin in this book and is really constantly pointing you to what's right. And as you can tell, he has incredible, amazing stories that are so compelling to listen to. But my favorite thing that happened throughout the process of this book was you had offhandedly mentioned to me, we've never talked about this, offhandedly mentioned to me one time how handy you were.
Very handy.
Like, I actually think we were in Rebecca's house interviewing, and something was happening with the air conditioning, and you're like, I'm handy, I got this. Now, I will tell you, the first time I interviewed your wife, I said, come with stories, like, send me keywords and I'll remind you. She sent me 10 stories. I would say 9 out of 10 of them were stories throughout your entire very long relationship about how not handy you were. And she had no idea that you made such a big point about how handy you were to me offhand. Can you just tell the story, maybe just one story, because I don't want everyone to think you're so amazing, you're up here, you're telling these incredible stories, but, like, actually, you do have faults. And one of them is you can't fix anything. There was a skylight in your apartment. Heckingers comes to mind.
Yeah. So Laura and I lived in this apartment in D.C., and it had these, like, slope, kind of like, ceilings that were high, and there was a skylight, and it was leaking. And so I decided I was going to fix it. So I went down to this place called Heckinger, which is like the small version of like a Home Depot or Lowe's, where I went there a lot to buy supplies. I'm not sure why I did, because then I would bring them home and not be able to do anything with the supplies. But I enjoyed feeling, like, as Lori would say, a manly man going down there and buying this stuff. So I went down there, I got a ladder, I got some caulk, because I figured caulk was needed to deal with this. And I leaned the ladder up into the hole of the skylight. I climbed up. I had my caulk gun on my belt. I was feeling really good. And I'm up there and I'm looking at the leak, and I'm not knowing exactly what to do, but I know I'm about to put a lot of caulk on this skylight and fix it. And just then, Lori came home and said, "Oh my God, don't move." And I said, "Well, where do you want me to go? I'm up on this ladder." It's like a 20-foot ladder up on the ceiling. "The ladder's upside down." And I'm like, "The ladder's upside down?" She goes, "There's a flat part and a round part. Why are your feet on the round part?" And then I noticed as I looked down, every step on the round part had caution, do not step, every step of the way. So I very slowly inched my way down, got to the bottom, and we called a handyman to come fix the skylight. She never let me live down. One time, I thought I could fix the sink that was leaking. And so, you unscrew the little washer under the sink. There's 1,000 parts in there. I don't know why, but they all came out. I laid them down in order on the counter, went to Heckinger to buy the new thing, but the new thing wouldn't go on because I had taken too many parts out from the faucet. So I called Lori's dad, who's an engineer, an actual engineer, went to MIT. And I was like, I need to just put the sink back together, even if it doesn't work anymore. I just need it to get back together. And Lori walked in on that with her dad coaching me on how to fix the broken sink. There's story after story where I have not been very handy. But to this day, I can tell you, I still try.
Good man. And those stories will never not be funny to me. I could just listen to them all the time.
The latter one was scary.
I wanted to give you some levity before we dive back into some things that are maybe not quite as funny. Let's talk about what happened nearly a year ago at your house. I know we talked about it a little bit.
We're off of levity now?
Off of levity. We're going right back into the darkness. The event that happened at the governor's residence on Passover.
Yeah.
You are not the first politician this year or the year before to be the victim of political violence. And I think for myself and probably everyone in this audience, that is one of the most disturbing parts about living today. And there are a lot of disturbing parts in our politics today. And the casualness and the frequency of political violence in this country is so deeply disturbing and speaks to so many of the issues that we're facing, the divisiveness, people's lack of connection and isolation, the kind of disassociation with our community, with the people who serve us, the people who live near us. And I don't know that anyone feels like they have the solution. How did we get here and how do we get out?
We have experienced far too much political violence in the last few years. And look, political violence has always been around, but it has exploded in terms of frequency, and we are victims of it. I think we've gotten here for a few reasons. Over the last 10 years, our politics have been defined by a singular figure who brings chaos and cruelty into our lives every day, who incentivizes division, and who tries to rip us apart every day in order to suit his own politics. Now, he's not alone responsible for political violence, but he's got a hand in it. In fact, I think all leaders have a hand, not necessarily in fomenting it, but certainly they have a responsibility to try and address it. And I think what we need more of today are leaders who speak and act with moral clarity and who call out political violence wherever they see it, on the political left, on the political right, whether it's directed at someone on the left or right, or whether it's brought about by someone on the left and the right. And right now we have politicians in this country who, when the political violence is against someone that, they don't like, they don't acknowledge it. And that gives a pass to others who would be violent toward that particular type of person or that person who's registered in that party. You think about this. Charlie Kirk and Melissa Hortman were gunned down and killed within, I think it was a month or two or so of one another. Donald Trump couldn't utter the name Melissa Hortman, but he said the name Charlie Kirk. I talked about both. I think all leaders have a responsibility to call this out no matter where they see it, and not just when it's convenient for them, and not just when it's comfortable for them. So I think we have politics right now that rewards division. We have someone who's defined our politics that engages in cruelty every day. And now we have leaders who simply can't call out something that should be easy for us all to call out, and that is saying political violence has no place in our society, no matter who the hell is engaging in it. And we're stuck in a bad cycle right now.
President Trump did call you after the attack at your house. He didn't call you immediately, but He did call you after, and we talked about it, and you wrote about it in the book. And that one article that I did read about the book that called you bold for talking about your Jewishness said you were brave for writing about the fact that you even engaged in a conversation with President Trump. Mm-hmm. And while I don't have a ton of kind words to say about this, I find it just fascinating that it is considered a brave thing to talk about having a conversation with somebody who you don't politically agree with. Mm. And I think that that is a huge part of what is happening, that we have stopped being willing to listen to other people who don't outwardly agree with you. Yeah. And I know that throughout your career, we've talked about this so many times, and you wrote about it so beautifully. You are a politician who will work with anybody to get shit done.
Anybody.
And you've done that throughout your career, and we've now reached to a place where we can't even have conversations with people who don't agree with us.
Yeah. Look, I'm from Pennsylvania, the ultimate swing state, right? It's toughest state in the country to get elected in and to govern in. I've got one Democratic U.S. Senator, one Republican. I got a split congressional delegation. My state House is led by Democrats by 1 vote, and my state Senate is led by Republicans by 2 votes. I was the only governor in the country for a while with a divided legislature. Now, I think Gretchen Whitmer is the other one. And so for me to get any bill to my desk, to sign any bill into law, requires Democratic votes and Republican votes. throughout my whole career, I've been willing to work with people on both sides of the aisle. It is literally mandatory in my job right now to work with people on both sides of the aisle to get things done. And by the way, we've gotten a ton of stuff done, from, vastly improving our quality public education, increasing funding for public education by 30%. Made a pledge to hire 2,000 more police officers. We did. Violent crime is down 13% in our state. We've got the only growing economy in the northeastern part of the United States. We've generated more jobs than all but 3 other states in the country. I mean, we're doing really good stuff. Cut taxes 7 times. We've got an $8 billion budget surplus. Good things are happening in our state because we're finding ways to work together. And my approach to that, when I sit down with the Republican leaders and others, is to really basically say, what are the 10 things you want to do? I'll tell you the 10 things I want to do. And what I can guarantee you is there's probably 6 or 7 on that list we are never going to agree on. But instead of focusing on those 6 or 7 and just fighting about it, which, by the way, would get me a lot more likes on Twitter or on social media, just engaging in the fight, I instead focus on the 3 or 4 things where we actually have some common ground and do the hard work necessary to try and move the ball forward and get those things done. I do that because it's part of my nature. I read about that a lot in the book. I also do that because when you take an oath of office to do these jobs, what people really want at the end of the day is for you to make their life just a little bit better, to accomplish something for them, to make sure that their world is improved a bit. And the only way you do that is by finding ways to work with other people, including people who think differently than you, and getting stuff done for those people you represent.
Well, what you're talking about is a government that actually works for people.
Yeah.
And that's why you're so intensely popular in Pennsylvania. I don't think that most people who live here or all across the country feel like government is working for them at the local level, at the state level, at the federal level. And not only is government not working for them, but they really don't feel it. And so how do you get people to believe that government is a force of good again? Because I think that that's how you start having better people serve you, is the belief that the people who serve you can actually do stuff for them.
You got to show your work. And you've got to show people the result of government actually working together to solve problems. Sometimes it's super visible. You all remember when I-95 collapsed in Philadelphia and they said it was going to take 6 months to repair? We got it reopened in just 12 days.
How did you do that?
We got rid of the bureaucracy. I signed an executive order doing away with all the bureaucratic red tape. I worked with the Philadelphia building trades who were unbelievably skilled. We worked 24/7. And we trusted the people who were out doing the work to be innovative, to demonstrate ingenuity, and not allow the bureaucracy back in an office to slow them down. And we allowed the people of Philadelphia, of Pennsylvania, of the country really who were watching to see what good, hard work between government and the private sector can accomplish. We challenged them, we cheered them on, and good things came about. And we proved in that moment that government doesn't have to be a hindrance to progress. That if government figures out a way to be more nimble, get out of the way in certain areas, have an executive that's willing to kind of block and tackle in the bureaucracy and unleash the full potential of its people, good things can happen. It's one of the reasons why I've nerded out and taken Pennsylvania from 48th in the country. By the way, you want to be first, not 50th. 48th in the country in time to get your permit, to first or second in the country on the amount of time it takes to get a permit, because we want government to not be a hindrance to progress.
Can you explain what that, we've talked about this, so can you explain what it means about getting your permit quickly and why that would be important to people?
You want to build a building in Pennsylvania, you want to build a building in California, I assume it's the same way. You got to get all kinds of permits, environmental permits, transportation permits, all this stuff. It would take years to get those permits in Pennsylvania before. That stymies growth. I'm a pro-growth governor. It makes it harder for people to want to invest capital in your state. It makes it harder to create jobs. But now, if instead of waiting 2 years to get that permit, you get that permit in a day or 2 or 3 or a week, you're allowing businesses to thrive. You're allowing good things to happen. By the way, while still protecting the environment and public health and public safety. Day I got sworn in, it took 8 weeks to get a standard business license in our state. Whether you wanted to be a barber or you wanted to run an accounting firm, 8 weeks. Today, it takes 1 day to get that same license. That's an example of the kind of speed that we're able to provide. And that's because I believe government can actually be a force for good in people's lives, can help them get their business off the ground. And by the way, it's also real money. Talking to my barber the other day, 8 weeks without a license to operate would have cost him thousands of dollars of haircuts that he would have been able to otherwise do. Now he's pocketing those thousands of dollars because he gets that permit in just 1 day. These are the kinds of things government needs to do more of that's going to help the private sector thrive, that's going to help us get big things done. It's also going to help, the byproduct of this, is it's going to help people believe again the government can be a force for good in people's lives. And if people get their permit quickly and they begin to believe again, and there's slightly less cynicism in our society, slightly less cynicism in our communities and our government, and people feel a little bit more hopeful, then maybe our politics begins to change. Maybe it's less of a battle for the lowest common denominator, and instead people begin to feel that there's opportunity and hope and good things that can come when they reach out to their government. And if they start to feel that way and they engage more, ultimately you get better representation and you get better politics and a better society.
I have a million more questions for you.
Okay.
But the audience has a million questions for you.
Okay.
I'm now looking for the audience
Let's
questions.
see if the audience questions are
The
tougher.
audience questions are definitely tougher than my
Okay.
questions, so buckle up. Okay. This kind of dovetails with what you were just talking about. Affordability is the word of the moment. How have you responded to this issue in Pennsylvania? How would you look at this issue if you were in a broader role?
So I'm going to ignore the last part of the question. We've cut taxes 7 times on my watch as governor. We've made childcare more affordable. We've cut taxes for small business owners 3 different times. We passed the first ever working Pennsylvanians tax credit. If you are working now and you're middle and low income, 940,000 Pennsylvanians can qualify for almost $1,000 this year in their taxes that they'll get back. So we're putting a lot of money back in people's pockets, putting money back in farmers' pockets and small business owners' pockets and parents who are trying to afford childcare. Unfortunately, at the same time, Donald Trump pushed a button that started a trade war by launching these idiotic tariffs that he thinks are being paid by other countries, but are really being paid for by the American people. And so we're seeing our farmers get screwed. We're seeing families pay a lot more at the grocery store. You order something, whatever, on Amazon or wherever, you're now paying basically a tariff tax on every package you get, including the de minimis ones, the ones that are, relatively cheap, all because Donald Trump put these tariffs in place. In addition to that, gas prices in Pennsylvania have gone up nearly 50 cents in the last 8 days. I'm not sure what it is here, and we're seeing gas spikes nationally. A little more here, I guess. Yeah.
Honestly, you need to keep your eyes open when you're driving around here and look at the gas prices. You will faint.
Okay. So people are paying more at the pump because of what Donald Trump is doing overseas, paying more for all kinds of goods and services because of the tariffs. So we're cutting taxes. We're putting money back in people's pockets. We're actually reducing home prices as well through this big housing initiative that we have. But unfortunately, the federal government is making people's lives more difficult. So I would say the average person kind of doesn't process all that. So while their costs are going down in Pennsylvania, but they're getting hit in other ways, they just know things cost more. And as a result of that, they're frustrated, and they're right to be frustrated. I think it's one of the reasons why we've got to figure out a way to have a check on this president in these upcoming midterms, and God willing, move in a different direction in a couple years after.
Well, I'm going to do the audience a solid. If you were at a federal level, what would you be doing differently?
I would not be putting tariffs on the American people, certainly. And I'd be laser focused on trying to bring costs down. Remember, he sold us a bill of goods in the election saying that he was going to bring down the price of eggs and this and that and the other thing. He's making everything cost more. And by the way, he's admitted to this to the farmers. He's offering them a bailout because he knows that he's increased the costs for our farmers. So we have seen that his policies continually result in not only more chaos, but higher costs on the American people. And that is not something that we all voted for, and that is certainly not a direction we are going to hopefully continue in this country.
Okay, speaking of directions we are hopefully not going to continue, we have a question about ICE. Do you anticipate an increased presence of ICE and Border Patrol in Philadelphia? How is your office handling ICE in Pennsylvania?
Look, I think what we just saw in Minneapolis was shameful. It was unconstitutional, and 2 Americans are dead because they were directed by the President of the United States to show up in an American city, violate people's constitutional rights, and wreak havoc on a community. The mission that the President set them out on was a flawed mission that made the American people less safe and destroyed the trust between law enforcement officials and the community. I will tell you, as the former chief law enforcement officer of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, the most important tool any law enforcement official has is not a radio, a badge, or a gun, but the level of trust they have with the community. And it is hard to build that up. And Donald Trump and his cronies came in and eviscerated that in Minneapolis, and did so sadly in the process of claiming 2 American lives and disrupting many others. As a governor, you are preparing every day for emergencies in your state. Typically, you're preparing for an awful weather event, or God forbid a shooting, or some God forbid terrorist attack. We are now literally doing tabletop exercises about what happens if the President of the United States deploys troops into my state against my wishes, as he did here in Los Angeles. If the President of the United States deploys ICE into our communities and tries to erode that trust, tries to threaten American people, tries to wreak havoc on our farmlands and in our downtown centers. This will be one question I probably don't give you a very fulsome answer on, but rest assured we are prepared in Pennsylvania should Donald Trump try and pull that with us, and we will not stand for it. Remember, I've taken Donald Trump to court so far as governor 19 times, dozens of times as attorney general. As governor, I've never lost when I've taken him to court. So whether it's on the streets or in court, I'm prepared to hold this president accountable and not let him violate the rights of the people of Pennsylvania.
That felt pretty fulsome to me. Okay. Let's see. You have emerged as a real voice in the national Democratic politics. What is one thing you believe the Democratic Party itself is currently getting wrong about how to protect American democracy, and what reforms would you suggest to strengthen national institutions?
I think right now folks are genuinely scared that the democracy that started in my state 250 years ago is really at risk of breaking apart. Remember, the brilliance of our founders is that they left the work to successive generations to go out and seek a more just society, to create more tolerance, to create more inclusion. That was their brilliance. In some ways, the risk they left to us is that they assumed that good people would be in these positions of public trust. That you couldn't write every law down, you couldn't write every provision down because you just trusted that there'd be good people in these offices that respected the rule of law and respected their fellow Americans, even if they had differences on policies. We do not have such a figure leading this nation right now. He doesn't respect the rule of law, he doesn't respect all Americans, and he doesn't respect our institutions. And I think we as a party, and more importantly, we as Americans, have a responsibility to call that out and to figure out a way to create an institutional check on this man. And I think the first opportunity we will have is in these midterm elections. Now, I come from a swing state. You do not. And some would argue, I mean that with no disrespect, some would argue that these midterms only matter in these swing states. I would argue that these midterms need to not just be a battle in swing states like mine, but a national referendum on what Donald Trump is doing. Imagine what happens when you elect whoever's going to be your next governor, not with 40 or 50% of the public showing up to vote, but 95% of the public showing up to vote. Imagine what happens if you have a groundswell of people show up in districts that maybe aren't considered a swing district, but all of a sudden you're putting Democrats in an office where heretofore they might not have had a shot. That sends a message that what's happening in America today is not okay, and it creates, at least in the House of Representatives, I would hope, a check on this president's policies. You've got a Congress of the United States that literally will not stand up to him. Literally won't stand up to him. Think about how profoundly and pathetically weak these members of Congress are, that they fight to get in these jobs, and then they refuse to do them because they're afraid this guy might tweet at them. That demonstrates a weakness. And so if they're not going to grow a spine, you all got to help grow a spine for them by throwing them the hell out and having a national referendum in these midterms that serves as a check on the President of the United States and bolsters our democracy and begins to strengthen those institutions. Now, as it relates to the Democratic Party, we can't just be the institutionalist party where once he's gone, we just build it back up the way it was before. I think we have a responsibility, and I would argue an opportunity right now, to build whatever comes next in a different way, in a way that's more responsive, that is more quick, that is more just, and that shows results to people in a way that decreases the cynicism and increases the optimism in this country. We have a real opportunity. It starts with these midterms, and that's what we need to be focused on right now in this public, being a check on the president. It starts with these midterms.
I'm supposed to ask you one more question, but I'm going to ask you two because I like these questions, and it feels really lovely to hear a politician talk in complete sentences that are also hopeful. So I'm going to keep it going.
I'm still doing complete sentences. I'm on like East Coast time. I can't believe I'm still doing complete sentences.
How do Democrats counter the Nick Fuentes/Tucker Carlson tide where young men are increasingly and alarmingly drawn to neoconservative, sexist, and racist candidates? How do Democrats try to attract some of these young voters who will be voters for the next 50 years? Great question.
Well, first I would say people like Fuentes and Carlson are crazy dangerous. These are racist people, these are bigoted people, these are anti-Semitic people. And by the way, there's folks like that on the left too. Let's be real. And I think we got to call it out on both sides. And what is scary is how they're kind of meeting. And they're kind of starting to say some of the similar things. Unfortunately, we've got too many young people who have turned off politics because they feel like it is not a way for them to make, it is not serving them. It's not making their lives better. And they're frustrated by what they see. And typically they're frustrated with politicians who just show up with negative energy, talking negatively about others, and not actually offering them any hope or any prescription for something that might make their life better. My kids tell me when I show up on a college campus, they're like, never talk about your opponent, never say anything negative about others, tell them what you're doing to make their lives better. Young people are dying for something that is hopeful and optimistic and positive. And when they don't receive that, and they're chronically online, they're drawn into some really dangerous places, into some really dangerous conversations that are happening online. Laura and I see that with our 4 kids, and thankfully they've not gotten sucked into that, but they're aware of it. When my 14-year-old came to me the other day, now 15-year-old came to me the other day and says, Dad, you know this guy running for governor in Florida? I said, what guy running for Florida? He's talking about that guy Fishback. That guy who is dangerous, he's a groyper, he's really, really out of his mind, but presents himself in a way a little bit more attractive or what have you, that's the wrong word, but presents himself in a way that doesn't show up right away in the way he talks. That also raises another red flag, which is the way in which young people are being served this information are on these platforms that have absolutely no controls, no guardrails on them. And this is an example of where the Congress of the United States has failed to step up to regulate social media. And more governors are starting to band together, Republican and Democrat alike, understand that we've got to figure out how to put some controls on this so that our kids aren't fed this constant dose of negative, this constant dose of bigotry and racism and anti-Semitism, and not constantly being barraged by that. Sorry.
I mean, I saw you tweet about this. I actually haven't talked to you about this, but I'm so happy you brought this up as a mom to like 1.7 children. You are doing this in Pennsylvania. You're starting to talk about doing this in Pennsylvania. How do you, as a governor, sort of start the conversation about regulating the use of social media?
Look, it's multi-pronged. One, I'm for a bell-to-bell ban. You can't have your phones out between the first bell or the last bell in school. It's got to be in your backpack, in your locker, somewhere locked away. I think that's common sense. Hopefully my legislature will put that bill on my desk soon. I'll sign it into law. Second, we also have to be mindful as parents that you're never going to be able to completely get this away from your kids. You got to teach them how to be good digital citizens. So my wife, Lori, together with our Secretary of Education, has been working on digital literacy, toolkits and playbooks, and giving young people the ability to learn fact from fiction when they look at something online, giving teachers more skills to be able to teach that. I think we need to be doing a lot more of that teaching in school, how to spot certain things so that they're real or fake, how to understand the impact of AI on all this stuff that's being fed to our young people online. I just think we've got to be far more aggressive about it, and we've got to hold these social media companies accountable for what they're putting out there. They can't just simply hold their hands up and wipe their hands clean of it. They've got to have some responsibility in responsible regulation that's going to protect our kids.
I'm obsessed with that, and I hope that you talk about this a lot. It's so central to everything that we've been talking about. Okay, last question. Do you see the possibility of a gay, female, or Jewish president in 2028? Talking about, the Nick Fuentes, Tucker Carlson continued and the algorithm, is it possible for someone who is not Nick Fuentes or Tucker Carlson to win that office?
Well, I sure as hell hope Nick Fuentes or Tucker Carlson does win. It is absolutely possible for a gay president, Jewish president, woman president, whatever examples you raise there. And do you know why I believe that? Because I really believe in the goodness of the American people. And I really think at the end of the day, what the American people want is someone who's going to serve them, someone who's going to listen to them, someone who's going to do for them. And I believe it is less important to the American people what they look like or who they love or who they pray to, and much more important about what's in their heart, what's in their head, what their views are, and whether they can deliver for them. The American people are good. They are decent. They are honorable people who I think are being misserved by many of the politicians who lead them right now. Hopefully our politicians will catch up to the goodness of the people, and hopefully whoever leads this country going forward will be able to do so in a way that repairs the wounds that Donald Trump has created. And instead of leading with chaos and cruelty and corruption, will lead with integrity and try and bring us back together as a nation. We need to heal as a country, and we need all of you to be involved in that process. I'm grateful that you're here tonight to spend some time learning about my book. I'm grateful that you're here tonight to think a little bit about how we've got to repair our world, to do what I was taught growing up. It's called tikkun olam, repairing the world. I think we all have a responsibility to do that. And hopefully with your engagement as engaged citizens, you'll be able to lead the way to help begin to fix our politics, to repair our world, and to bring some decency back to this country. It starts with these midterms, and I want to encourage everybody here to vote and be engaged. And I want to thank you all for coming tonight. Thank you. Emily Jane Fox, thank you.
Thanks, Gov.